as far as the blood drive goes, I bet Stinky was just excited about the free cookies they give out.
You're wrong, Arnold.
Hello everybody, Chocolate Guy here, and welcome back to another countdown. We're finally here at the last season of Hey Arnold. Now, like season 4, I hadn't seen this one in many years, so while I had opinions going in, I wasn't sure how much I would stand by those opinions coming out. And after rewatching, yeah, this season is really strange. First off, in the last list, I described it from memory as a jack-of-all-trades, anything-goes oddball season that pulls from many different places in the show, which is very much true. What I mean by this is that all the previous seasons have some sort of identity that separates them. Season 1 is focused on world and character building and tells a lot of simple stories, showing off childlike experiences to accomplish this. Season 2 is a bit of a transition from that into the very character study and development, much more fleshed out Season 3, which is what that one is like. And Season 4 is a transition from that into this season, which is sort of this weird fusion that's just a hybrid of all 4 previous seasons and pulls aspects from each one. Majority of the episodes feel like you could put them right smack dab in the middle of other seasons, and other than animation, voice acting, and maybe quality, they would fit right in. It's fun trying to pin down what season you think an individual episode was most inspired by in this one. But what I didn't remember is that the season simultaneously does, especially in the second half, try to move the show forward in a different direction, and we get more interesting world building and character development centered stuff, and really unique episode ideas that I couldn't see any other season trying. It makes me interested to see what this show would have looked like if it went on to have a season 6. That's the interesting thing about season 5, is that it's this weird balancing act of pushing the show in a unique new direction and playing it safe with plot archetypes and kinds of episodes that would have worked in the past. So it pains me to say that this season isn't great. Look, I do like it, but I have to say that it's pretty undeniable that this is the worst season of the show. Look, the season actually fixes some of the complaints I had with season 4. This season does take more risks than that one does, which is what I wanted from that season. But I don't think an amount of them actually work. In fact, I think the ones that don't fail in a pretty spectacular manner. And when the season plays it safe, it plays it ridiculously safe. There are some good and great episodes that draw from previous seasons, but there's a lot of other ones, including episodes I like, that just feel like stuff I've seen before, or at the very least are very, very similar, and nowhere near as good to whatever I'm forced to compare them to. Because of these things, we get some of the worst episodes of the show, and there's more bottom-of-the-barrel episodes here than in any other season, which is why I was really excited to make this worst list. Also, most of the problems I mentioned last season still apply here, and I think some of the strengths that season 4 does have, this one just doesn't. The character writing is not as good here, along with the story writing overall, and we get to see less interesting stuff from great characters like Helga, which is a real shame because I feel like she was at her most interesting in the prior season despite its faults, but they don't really do a lot with her here. I also saw a lot more examples this season where I felt like the characters were just flatly out of character, or their traits were over-exaggerated to make a story make sense in a way that didn't work at all. I know that happens on occasion in the past seasons, but it was way more prevalent this time around, as the character and story writing decreased in quality. I would have loved for Hey Arnold to get another season, 100%, but for how inconsistent this season is, and for how much of a downgrade it is, with a lot of things just not working, and a lot of the problems in season 4 not being improved upon, but honestly getting worse, it does make me wonder if season 6 would have really been any good. It also makes me wonder how much of the season not being the best has to do with the production around the first movie and Craig Bartlett's fallout with Nickelodeon over the Jungle movie, both of which I will talk about in the future. Look, once again, I do like this season. For all its problems, there are many episodes I enjoy for tapping into the fun world, while tapping into good ideas from other seasons in a pretty interesting way. And at the same time, taking many risks that do actually pan out. And the ones that do pan out big time. There are some truly fantastic episodes this season, which help counterbalance the crap. And if nothing else, I do think this is a more interesting season overall to watch and critique compared to season 4. And I still like more episodes here than I don't. But before we get into the great episodes, we need to talk about the said crap. So let's get right into it. Here is my list of the top 5 worst Hey Arnold season 5 episodes. Oh man, you know this season's got some crap when this is only number 5. Phoebe's Little Problem is one of, if not the stupidest episodes the show has ever put out. Everything about it is mind-numbingly terrible. The plot is one of the show's worst and cringiest. It follows Phoebe as she embarrasses herself in front of the entire school by farting into a microphone while giving a speech. As I was writing this script, I was originally going to make a comparison to an idea that this plot could have used that would have made it good, but I actually can't think of anything. This just isn't a good setup for anything. It feels like if this happened, Phoebe would be embarrassed for like a day or so, kids would make fun of her, and then she would get over it. The kids would probably forget all about it after something else weird happens anyways. Maybe she'd be a little bothered about how this undermines her reputation as smart and respectable, but honestly, I don't think she cares about that too much, as long as she proves she is smart. This is a lame setup for a story to begin with that doesn't really have anywhere it can go, and this episode still manages to pick the worst direction possible. The plot of this episode is that Phoebe gets so embarrassed and is so upset about her reputation being ruined because of a fart that she decides to not come back to school and transfer. So her class has to convince her to come back. Okay, problem 1. Phoebe is ridiculously out of character here. I don't believe she would take this drastic of an action over something like this, and leave her classmates and close friends behind like Helga. Problem number 2, it is hard to take this plot too seriously and feel that bad for Phoebe and how upset she is to begin with, because it's all centered around an accidental fart that, as I said, kids would probably forget about next time something even remotely weird happens at the school. And that's before the episode tries to have these really high stakes of her maybe leaving the school over this. It's really silly, and when it's not silly, it's once again really stupid because of how out of character Phoebe is to be used in this way. Problem 3. Nobody is invested in what's going on. Mr. Simmons cares about Phoebe, but nobody else could really even give a damn. And Mr. Simmons doesn't care enough to not make stupid mistakes like using the word fart accidentally multiple times. And the rest of the kids have to be promised something to even agree to go with Mr. Simmons to help Phoebe, including Helga, who once again is her friend. I didn't mention it in the intro, but one downside that comes with the character writing not being as great this season is that the character dynamics and world building are not as strong and fleshed out, which we see here. In other seasons, I feel like even if all these kids aren't insanely close, most of them have some sort of a friendship and do care for each other, and at least have a unique and interesting dynamic with each other that we see a lot of in other seasons and not as much in season 5. I could see the kids having to be pushed to help Phoebe because they're kinda self-centered, as most kids are, but I think they would do it and take it seriously because they really care on some level about their classmates. At least most of them do. But not here. It genuinely feels like most of these kids aren't even friends with Phoebe or even each other, which once again gives me no reason to care. The rest of the episode is just the kids giving half-hearted attempts to change Phoebe's mind. None of them are really funny, including the punchline to Mr. Simmons' sincere attempt. I won't lie, Helga's exchange with Phoebe was the only thing in this episode that was a little amusing, but in this situation, it feels out of character for her. But then, this episode ends with, shocker, Arnold inspiring her not to run away and take control of her image, and then she does. And then Gerald pisses his pants, taking the attention away from her. Very predictable and generic ending to end this pointless endeavor. Look, what can I even add at this point? This is just one of the most pointless and mind-numbing episodes of the show. The plot is stupid, none of the characters feel very engaged in it either, and they're out of character anyways. There's nothing that really brings this one up, and the only reason it's only number 5 is because, once again, Season 5's got some crap. Speaking of...
Just get out.
We go from stupid and pointless to incredibly irritating and pointless. What is there to be gained from watching this episode? What is there to get out of it? It's just Arnold being bothered and accused of something he did not do, and no one other than Sid would have any reason to think he has done, and then he gets punished for it until the truth is revealed. The setup is contrived, of course. Gerald and Sid trust the money the three of them got together to be in Arnold's hands for the night, before they take it to the police station. And of course, it accidentally falls into the wrong hands of a weird woman Arnold sees that of course is so strange looking that Arnold can't describe her very well, so no one believes him when he said he didn't take the money all for himself. But all that is kind of whatever. What isn't, though, is that the rest of the episode is just all the kids being weird towards Arnold over this, including Gerald. First off, I believe Sid would act weird and accuse Arnold of stealing the money. He is a paranoid kid, even if he did trust Arnold with the money in the first place. It is really obnoxious watching him hammer at Arnold for everything in this episode after the money goes missing, which is unpleasant and most of what this episode has to offer, making this an annoying slog to sit through for how much of this episode is just Sid harassing Arnold, but it is still in character. At the same time, however, why would all the other kids who trust Arnold and also have nothing to do with the situation buy the story from Sid? And no one else when Arnold is one of the most trustworthy people ever. It's really bizarre. And it's just done to make more crap thrown Arnold's way. But the dumbest thing is Gerald not knowing if he believes Arnold or not, which is baffling. Arnold is his closest friend and has proven time and time again that he is trustworthy to the end. Why wouldn't he believe him? It's so out of character. All this happens just to crap on Arnold, which they do, and it's irritating when it isn't boring and repetitive. And shocker, Gerald comes around and Arnold's innocence is proven, but who cares? There's nothing to be gained from this episode besides a slight headache. There's so little substance here, and nothing even remotely enjoyable happens. And either of these first 2 episodes I discussed on this list in a better season would have been a lock for number 1. But we're only at number 4.
You're a rat, Arnold! A rat think!
This is the other episode in the infamous pairing with Bag of Money, and I think this episode is generally considered to be the better of the two, but honestly I think this one is much worse than the last 2 episodes discussed, and here's why. There really isn't anything I like about this episode, and I could rattle off many problems. The episode is boring, the pacing is bad, the jokes aren't very funny, the story is so cliche as all can be, and you know exactly where it's gonna go. There's nothing to really get engaged with for this reason, and there is other stuff that isn't super interesting to talk about, but create a bad episode nonetheless. But there are two big problems that make this one of the show's worst. One of them being that Simmons is so out of character here. Mr. Simmons is a nice, understanding man who doesn't love strict discipline or treating his kids badly to get them to behave, but he is not a coward or an idiot. For the story to work, they make Simmons way dumber than he is to try and implement all the students' proposals and have no authority whatsoever, and they also make him a total pushover who doesn't even really try to get the students in line. I don't believe either of these things are true, and the way he was written is just super frustrating for how interesting of a character Mr. Simmons usually is. And I think what bothers me specifically with the butchering of his character here is that the story around Mr. Simmons becoming principal could have been really good, because Mr. Simmons is an interesting character, and seeing what he would do and the real problems that might arise from it could have been great. But every turn, they write him so awfully and make him so stupid for this dumb plot to work, and it sucks. Nothing around the school falling apart is fun and funny, and the story is just predictable outside of this. Once you see the school start to decay, you know Simmons is gonna step down and ask Warts to come back, which leads me to my second problem: how they use and treat Principal Warts here. He is really rude and cruel towards his students. He is a bad principal, especially in this episode, giving kids ridiculous punishments for minor things and even just like honest mistakes that aren't even things worth punishing people over, and treating his students like crap. He should be nowhere near the school, much less principal. And while he commands discipline, he has so many other big problems that it really doesn't matter. And yet, this episode has the generic ending of them going back to Warts and asking him to come back, and even saying he wasn't doing a bad job, which just isn't true. The episode, through its stock plot, kind of paints the picture that what Warts did and has done isn't that bad, and bringing discipline to the school is the only thing that matters, which does not sit right with me. And well, yes, Warts admits that he could be less harsh and tries to do better when he gets his job back. It's just not enough. They don't do enough to make me think he will change, or do enough to criticize his actions earlier. For how much of a mess this episode already is, and how it butchers a character that could have created a very interesting plot, this element of Warts being rewarded his job back for being awful to the students, and the episode acting like he was only being a little bad, is what pushed this episode so high up. The reason it isn't any higher is because they do at least call out his actions in some sense and try to show him changing. So, this episode is bad and morally not great, but oh boy, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg when it comes to morally bad stuff.
I heard that snickering, young lady. Don't think you can pull a fast one on me.
So this is a loaded episode that's gonna be difficult to explain why I don't like it. The reasoning is not that complicated, but I'm gonna choose my words very carefully so I correctly communicate my points for this one, because it's really important. I'm gonna leave a bit of a warning here that I'm gonna discuss some really complex and upsetting topics more than I ever have before. So here we go. This episode has two major problems. One that makes it pretty bad, and the other, more disgusting one is what landed it on this list this high. The first problem is that the story just stinks and is boring. Chloe has no real personality outside of being annoying and manipulative. You know Gerald's attempts to hang out with her are meaningless because she's only interested in Jamie-O, so all the episode ends up being is Gerald inviting her over, she flirts with Jamie-O, and then Gerald gets mad and then they fight because he thinks that Jamie-O is trying to steal his girl. Oh, did I mention that this is also just a stupid misunderstanding plot? Because Gerald was treated poorly and had his stuff taken by Jamie-O earlier, he now thinks Jamie-O is after Chloe. which you can at least understand why Gerald would think that, but it's just super annoying because you know that that's not really what's going on, and you want them to have a real interesting conversation about what's going on, but no, we get more boring fighting. And that is all the episode has to offer. It's just this repetitive sequence over and over again, with no further momentum because there isn't really much of a story. And I know many episodes in the show try to just show off weird kid experiences in an interesting way and doesn't exactly have a super strong story. But this episode doesn't do that because nothing really happens for the most part. And after that, Chloe finally reveals what she's doing and the brothers make up, and that's really all that happens in the episode. The episode has nothing interesting to say about Chloe and her actions because once again she is a nothing of a character, and the episode has nothing to say about Gerald or Jamie-O's relationship other than Jamie-O is mean to Gerald and he should be less so. That's it. This episode is pretty aggressively boring, along with being repetitive and annoying, but you know what? That's whatever. A lot of episodes are like that. Some of the episodes before on this list are like that as well. But here's where I have to get into the other problem this episode had that firmly put it on this list above those ones. Here we go. Chloe is a harmful stereotype and a pretty gross showcase of the objectification in media of young black girls through the way Chloe acts and the way she is drawn. She is portrayed as nothing but the gross stereotype of a black girl who is quote-unquote mature for her age and sexualizes herself to do things she shouldn't, like seek relationships with older men who could take advantage of her. And the fact that Chloe isn't really a character at all outside of this means this is all the episode really sees her as, and brings all of that completely into the forefront so it is unavoidable. And it's episodes and pieces of media like this that perpetuate the negative idea that young black girls, or young girls in general, who get taken advantage of have these problems because they act and dress like this, and not because of older men who should know better, and media like this very episode that objectify female black teens in this way, which creates this negative idea that female black teens who look older for their age should and do act in this way, which is so damaging to not only black children and teens who see this as their representation, but to men who see these stereotypes as true, along with other people as well. And this episode has nothing to say on any of that. It doesn't go far enough where Chloe is taken advantage of, thankfully, but she is objectified and showcases the stereotype, and it helps perpetuate this gross way of thinking anyways. And instead of having some discussion around it, she's just treated like a normal manipulative villain with these traits. It lacks any nuance, and for this reason, the episode is really uncomfortable, and on top of all of that, actively downplays how not okay it is that Chloe is pursuing someone like Jamie-O. And the episode makes a much bigger problem out of her just using Gerald to get to him than what she is actually doing. Which, look, what she does to Gerald is bad, but an episode like this needs to address the huge elephant in the room in some capacity, or else it can kind of come off like condoning. Look, I am a white male, so I'm not the most qualified to talk about this issue, nor am I the voice people really should be hearing from. But the stereotype and objectification that Chloe represents, and the episode not breaking the stereotype and speaking out against it, but instead showing it off as a normalized thing that is just true to life, and using it as a dumb plot point more than anything, is really bad, and deserves to not only be discussed, but completely scrutinized and condemned. With that said though, the reason this isn't number one is because I don't think any of this was intentional. I think this was the writers creating a character for a story and not thinking about any of the horrible implications and the actual objectification of this teen going on. I truly do not think anyone went in with a hateful idea to objectify a black teen because they quote-unquote act this way and wanted to spread a damaging stereotype by doing so. This is still a problem, and pushing the stereotype by accident is still very damaging and worth calling out with no hesitation. And it really does says a lot about this problem in society and just how embedded it is in culture and how bad the writing in this episode truly is. But the episode doesn't fully go through with promoting this as normal or okay, and doesn't go as far as they definitely could have. It's not a lot, but it does keep the episode from being much more harmful than it is, even though it is already pretty harmful. Look, I know that's not much of a silver lining, or even really one at all, and once again, I am a white male, so just because this doesn't bother me enough to put it at number 1, by default, doesn't mean other people will not feel differently, and I completely get it. This episode is pretty reprehensible. There's a very compelling case for this to be number 1 by default for just how badly it botches all this up, and is just so morally gross and genuinely makes me uncomfortable in a way no other episode in the show quite does. And look, I moved this episode up the list for this reason from where it was originally going to be placed. Because there wasn't really anything I liked about it, and I couldn't find really any silver lining other than that really shitty one that just kept it out of number 1 and only did that. But there is one other episode I enjoy watching less, makes me almost as uncomfortable, but somehow bothers me more. God, this season, man.
Just stay out of my way, Jamie-O.
But before we get into what could possibly be the worst episode of the season, here are 6 dishonorable mentions. This season had a ton of crap that, while not bad enough to make it on the list, are still some of the worst things that the show has to offer. So they deserve to get at least a mention here. This is a boring, generic opener to the season. You know Stinky isn't a vampire, so the entire episode is just watching Sid get paranoid about different things, which is repetitive and pointless. While I like some of the jokes, and near the end I'm at least kind of curious why Stinky is doing some of the things he is in this episode, there really isn't much to this episode as a whole, because it lacks really any sort of substance. Also, it has one of the worst maybe this did actually happen endings the show has to offer. Like, yeah, Stinky might be a vampire. Okay, whatever. It's just stupid, man. Big Sis is a frustrating episode that in a better season would have easily made the worst list, like Student Teacher did. In some ways, this episode is worse than that one, because this conflict feels even more forced. I believe Helga would be jealous of Olga's new relationship with Lila, but I don't believe she would be this jealous, and I don't think it would manifest in this way. Olga is also so dense and oblivious here, and they play up that attribute way too much. It's probably her worst appearance. This episode simultaneously tries to tackle too much while tackling nothing at all. It tries to look at Helga and Olga's relationship, but they don't really do that, and they're both extremely out of character. Therefore, the episode is even less to actually say than something like Student Teacher, and the rest of the episode is just boring stuff we have already seen before. Helga tries to ruin Lila and Olga's time together in boring ways, then is confronted by Arnold about her true feelings and finally admits them. That's it. It's just paint by numbers and is as interesting as it sounds. Also, Lila is a nothing of a character here. I know she is not always the most interesting, but here specifically she has no personality and is just here to be cutesy with Olga and give Helga something to be mad at. This is definitely one of her worst appearances, and definitely the worst in season 5. But at least it doesn't involve Arnold's crush on her, which is good. Honestly, that really didn't come up in a negative way all season, which was nice. There are so many different things this episode could have tackled, involving Helga's relationship with Lila, and Olga's relationship with Helga, and Olga's relationship with Lila even. There's a lot of interesting things they could have picked apart, and they seem like they're going to try to at first, and then really just don't do anything with any of it, as I said earlier. Anyways, with all that said, this episode does have some interesting moments, and I don't think it's quite as annoying or poorly written as something like Student Teacher, so it is better than that episode, but it still sucks. Look, this episode is not very good, and is fundamentally broken. Pretty much nothing about it works. There's really no conflict, because both bullies, even if they don't like each other, would never give the lot to the 4th graders. None of Arnold's ideas have much of a chance of working, so there's nothing really to get invested in, and that's ignoring the fact that Ludwig is just a carbon copy of Wolfgang. And half this episode is just a meaningless football game that's just a repetitive sequence of the kids getting hurt. And nothing is really achieved if either side wins, so there's no reason to watch, and it's not even very visually interesting. It's kind of ridiculous how pointless and badly designed from a fundamental writing standpoint this episode is. And yet, while I acknowledge that this is one of the most incompetent episodes of the series, it's not one I really hate at all. I don't like it, but I do find myself kind of enjoying Arnold trying to maneuver his way through this weird situation anyways, and there are still some funny moments, even if it is all kind of pointless. And I still think this episode is more entertaining and less boring than some others in this season, which it has no right to be, which is why it got saved from being on the list. I think this is an episode that really could have worked if it was paced and written a little differently. The first half of this episode is Arnold hanging out with this rich guy, which is just kind of boring, and the second half is Arnold trying to fix the broken bond between him and his son. By the time the episode gets to this point, they don't have enough time to get me invested in either of these characters or make me want to see them strengthen their relationship. All it really amounts to is them hanging out, doing different things to try to connect with each other, and it's just kinda boring. Also, this episode has a very simple look on what makes a good relationship between a kid and their parent. They don't have to like the same things, both just have to invest time in what the others like from time to time, and just have to be there for one another. More the parent when the kid is younger, but as you get older, it can become more of a two-way streak. But this episode is too simple and not nuanced enough to handle this. Also, because this episode is underdeveloped, it feels like Arnold is getting himself involved with stuff he really shouldn't be. Like, these people's relationship is sad, but it's not really any of his business to try to fix it. Which I know is weird for me to say because there are a lot of other episodes where that could apply, but here specifically, there's just something about Arnold butting in that feels a little off, where it doesn't in other episodes. It's not too bad, but for some reason, Arnold's quest here does feel a bit weird to me, and this episode's just not very good. This episode is another example this season where Mr. Simmons feels out of character, with Mr. Simmons once again feeling pretty drastically out of character. Damn, this was just a bad season for Mr. Simmons. Well, I believe he would get nervous about this film crew coming into his classroom. To go this far and be this much of a jerk is just not in his character, and it's frustrating and a little uncomfortable to watch. And this episode is really generic outside of that. Simmons getting paranoid when he learns his class will be filmed, and making the kids memorize a script and it not going well and freaking out, and then Arnold has to talk with him and yada yada yada. You know exactly where the story's gonna go. The film crew is gonna come back in after and they're gonna authentically finally shoot the class with Mr. Simmons not getting in the way. It's not interesting and it's not fun because of how much of a paranoid buzzkill Simmons is. It's not on this list though, because there are some nice moments and some actually good jokes, and this one isn't as aggressively bad, so I did give it a pass. So this is an interesting one. the worst of the 20-minute specials from this season, or any other, and the only one I actively do not like. This would be the honorary number 6, and was very close to making the list proper. But how is a Hey Arnold special, which is a show that usually creates some of the best episodes out of its specials, be this bad? Well, I'll tell you, it's because this episode has very little story, tries to make a really big deal and have high stakes around a holiday that isn't super important, and just retreads stuff we've already seen, including in this season, making this a really tedious 22 minutes to sit through. This episode is just very repetitive and doesn't have a lot to offer, and really does show a lot of the aspects that make season 5 not the best at their worst. I should go more in depth, but this video is already long, and I kind of want to make an individual episode review of this one because I do have a lot I want to talk about. So I'll just leave it at that. It's a chore to sit through, that's 22 minutes instead of 11, but just wasn't bad enough to make it on the list over some truly awful competitors. Speaking of...
April Fools, I'm okay. Well, I'm not okay.
So here we go. Well, Gerald versus Jamie O was atrocious. The worst episode of this season for me was always gonna go to Curly's girl. This is the episode this season I enjoy watching the least and upsets me the most. That's an understatement because I actually hate it a lot. This episode follows Curly after Rhonda goes to him for help with something, and then he blackmails her into keeping up with an agreement they had, that she would be his girlfriend for a period of time if he did something for her. Right off the bat, this is a horrible setup. One of the show's worst. I don't know what would be fun or interesting about a story based on this setup. But you know, while this episode is doomed to fail from the start, I guess it isn't guaranteed to be one of the show's worst. Maybe it's just a little boring and uncomfortable. Oh, you wish, because what actually happens is one of the most gross and uncomfortable experiences this show has to offer. The rest of the episode is Curly consistently being weird and making Rhonda uncomfortable, which is not okay, but is kinda to be expected with this episode. It isn't the worst thing ever, I guess, but what happens next very much is. Rhonda dumps him, which is incredibly justified and satisfying, and is immediately treated like crap by her classmates. And the episode itself tries to frame the whole ordeal as a super awful thing for Curly, and tries to make us feel bad for him, playing part of the Operation Ruthless theme while showing him inconsolable and sad as the kids feel bad for him. Firstly, why would the kids turn on Rhonda like this? Even though Rhonda's a stuck-up jerk and they don't always like her, they also know how weird Curly is and have seen him be kind of weird towards Rhonda in this quote-unquote relationship. And they treat Rhonda like shit anyways. It's really infuriating. And it's even more infuriating that this episode sides with them and Curly, trying to make you feel sympathy for a blackmailer and harasser. That's already ridiculously bad, but just wait, it gets worse. Rhonda, in order to save her reputation, gets back with Curly for the time being, and when they're back together for this little act, he forces her to kiss him against her wishes. It's so uncomfortable, and it doesn't matter that Rhonda put herself in this situation where this could happen. What Curly did was gross and unacceptable. In the end, Curly does break it off with Rhonda to make her look good, which would be sweet if he also apologized for some of his gross behavior. But then, Rhonda and the episode act like Curly is actually nice and a cool guy. Bullshit. Curly is a blackmailer and a harasser who makes Rhonda feel uncomfortable throughout this entire episode and does things without her consent. That is what this episode is. It tries to make you feel bad and appreciate a harasser and villainize a victim who made a mistake and was harassed by this creepy kid because of it. I don't care that they're just kids. These are serious problems the episode brings to light through Curly's actions and gives endorsement to Curly as a person. Look, I don't think this was the episode's intention, like Gerald versus Jamie O. But unlike that episode, I really don't think it matters at all, because even if it was the intention, this episode couldn't be much worse, because the message, whether intentional or not, is all the same. Curly's a harassing, blackmailing creep, but he did one nice thing after an episode of being a weirdo, so he's a good guy, and Rhonda's just a jerk. Absolutely fucking awful. There's nothing redeeming here. This is the grossest episode of the show, and easily one of, if not its worst. And just barely beats out steep competition to be the worst episode of Hey Arnold, Season 5.
Now crawl back under the rock you came out of, you slug.
And with all that said, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content similar to this in the future. Also, leave a comment down below telling me what you thought of my list and what your own would have been. Stay tuned for the top 5 best Hey Arnold Season 5 episodes list, which will be out tomorrow. Season 5, despite its issues, has some truly fantastic episodes, and I can't wait to talk about them. But with all that said, this has been Chocolate Guy, signing off.